Hello, everyone. Welcome to another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I am your host. My name is Tessa Tovar. I'm kind of giggling and chuckling to myself because every time I start a podcast, my cat shows up and she is not disappointing today. She is very much here and rummaging around. Anyways, I digress. I am so excited to have Ellen Bard on the show. She is an amazing woman who's done a lot of work in many different areas, but I really want to dive into this topic at hand. She recently wrote the book, Your Work Wellness Toolkit, which is an amazing book full of all kinds of resources and really relevant exercises that are so pertinent to what we're going through in this particular time and space. What a joy to have you here, Ellen. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. And it's lovely to meet you and the cat, who definitely would like to be a podcast interviewee, I can see.
That'd be an interesting conversation. Do you ever talk to your animals?
We don't have an animal because we live in a condo in Bangkok, so it's a bit different. Mostly it's pigeons outside.
You could talk to those, I suppose. Can we dive into the book first? I want to hear about what was the impetus to writing this and creating this.
So my background professionally is a work psychologist. So one of the things that I spend a lot of my time on is talking to people who are in different kinds of workplaces. So huge ones, some of the biggest companies in the world, small ones, public sector, private sector, all kinds of different companies. And I've done a lot of work on self-care, I guess, what we would consider outside the workplace. And I realized that really there's a place for self-care specifically in the workplace. And it's something that's not super explored because obviously at work, most of us feel like, I have to do my work, I have to be successful. And we have these visions of what work should be. And we forget that if we don't nourish and nurture ourselves in the workplace, then we burn out. And when the World Health Organization categorized burnout as a syndrome last year or the year before, that was another piece of the puzzle to say, okay, this is really a problem for organizations because you need healthy employees and for us as individuals. So I brought my personal experience, because I have a lot of personal experience trying to take care of myself better, and my professional experience together to create the book.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It's so needed right now. Well, how do we make this a sustainable thing? I mean, I don't think that the work from home, number one, the work from home environment is going to go anywhere anytime soon. In fact, even before 2020, it seemed to me like there was a move towards a move away from brick and mortar and towards the mobile workplace, right? Working coffee shops, being able to pick up your laptop and kind of choose where you want to work. So number one, I think maybe this is a two-part question, actually. There's the shift from that person who is really used to working in the office environment, who now suddenly finds themselves working from home, maybe for the foreseeable future. That's going to be a rough transition for a lot of people, I would think. What are you finding?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what happened was people went into this crisis state, this emergency state. Oh, a pandemic's happened. Well, that's not something that's happened in our lifetime. Yeah. So there was a lot of there was more allowance for things going wrong, people adjusting. And now, as you say, it's become this sort of horrible phrase of new normal, but probably correct. And so there's the opportunity for us to step back and assess, rather than just kind of head in there and just barrel on with what we're doing, to step back and say, okay, well, what is working here? What isn't working here? And I think that's the piece that not everyone's managed to do, because we're so busy trying to juggle and handle all of the tasks in the moment that we're not necessarily stepping back and thinking about the big picture. And that might be things as simple as, so people use things like signs outside their door to tell their office door to tell their children or their partner, okay, I'm on a call right now, so please don't come in. Or it might be about creating boundaries for yourself to say, okay, at 6 o'clock or whatever works for you, I'm going to log off the computer. Even if I'm going to turn my computer again for pleasure, I'm going to physically shut my computer and I'm going to say work time is finished now. So this is called thresholding. So this idea of creating a boundary between your work time and your personal time. So there's lots of things we can do, but it does involve us like stepping back and taking some time to say, okay, what is it that's most challenging for me about working at home?
Yeah. Oh, that's so important. And what do you say to the person who says, I don't have time to slow down because I am that busy. I don't have time to step back and assess what isn't working because my inbox is flooded and I can't even get a lunch break some days.
That you are investing time to save time. So this is the tactical strategic challenge for people. Although it feels difficult, in order to make your life better in the longer term, sometimes we have to invest that piece of time to say, okay, how can I make my life better? And the idea is that it does make your life better in the longer term. And it's a tough thing to do. I'm not at all minimizing it. And usually it's about planning. So saying to yourself, okay, on Friday evening, I'm going to spend 30 minutes at the end of the day, just stepping back and looking at my situation and thinking, what are the biggest stressors and what practical things can I do about those?
Yeah, so true. Well, and you mentioned as we were introducing you that this book, the impetus for this book is based on like your real life experience. And I want to hear about your personal journey. From what I understand, you went from like a 60-hour work week, managing consulting in London, freelancing. You're an author. You've published fiction, nonfiction, and now you're in Thailand. But it sounds like you've worked all over the world, like something like 25 countries. So you've been through the fire of this, and I want to hear about that personal journey, that personal growth experience.
Yeah, when you're in the journey, you just do it. But then sometimes I do look back and think, oh, there's quite a lot in there. So yes, I was a very traditional working person in the corporate world. So I went through various degrees. I went through professional qualifications. I'm a chartered psychologist. I worked in management consultancy, which is a tough and tiring world. And I really enjoyed my job. So it wasn't about burnout for me in that sense, but I had a car accident early on, a long time ago now, and that turned into a chronic pain condition, which I'm sure many of your listeners will empathize with, and really sucks. And then later on, I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is also very challenging. And eventually, the energy and the effort that I was putting into work just tired me out. I couldn't go any further with it. I needed to take a break. So I took a sabbatical. I didn't actually, at that point, decide to stop working. My assumption was I would go and lie on a beach somewhere tropical. I would rest. I would nourish myself, and then I'd go back. And I had offers to go back to more senior positions, and assumed that would work out. But I started traveling, went to a few places in Southeast Asia, came to Thailand, and I saw people doing different things, working in different ways, creating different lives. And as a work psychologist, I found that super interesting, this idea of how are people engaging with work differently. And this is maybe 8 or 9 years ago. So I guess a bit before this idea of hybrid working or working from home was quite as prevalent as it is now. And I decided, maybe I could try things a bit differently. And I started freelancing, and then that worked out quite well. And then we created a life which felt much, much more nourishing, self-care at the center. But turns out you take your personality with you. And then I ended up having a year where I think I did 1 year where I did 120 flights and worked in a ridiculous number of countries, and got strep throat 7 times in a year. I didn't really know what stretch thought was at the beginning of the year. By the end of it, I had a very good idea. And then I thought, oh, you really do take your personality with you. Let's try going back to my self-care. So it was another wake-up call to remind me, which I very much will remind people around, that self-care is an ongoing process. It's not something you tick off the list, no matter how list-orientated, goal-orientated you are. It's something that needs to be small, sustainable, as you mentioned before, and happening regularly in your environment. You need to do those check-ins. So I didn't at that start of that year mean to take 120 flights, but the opportunities were there, felt like it was okay, it was exciting and interesting, and did nourish me in a different way, which I think is also very interesting. We have to balance how we nourish ourselves, and working with different cultures I find fascinating. As you say, I've worked in 25 countries now with people from maybe 40 or 50 different countries, and that's amazing. But you have to balance that with, well, actually, maybe that's too many flights when you're not a pilot or an air attendant. Yeah. And then last year, 2021, last year, I got diagnosed with a new thing, which is endometriosis, and had yet another opportunity to revisit my self-care. And some of that is very much mental. Like, that's the third chronic health condition that I've been diagnosed with, which doesn't feel great, but reminds me again to nourish myself, because there are so many things that I want to do. And as you say, there are lots of things that I do, but balance and making sure that I invest in my inner self, for want of a better word, is really important. That was a bit of a ramble about my story, but there's lots of bits to it.
Well, yeah. And I mean, as it should be, because it is your story and it's winding, and it's not, I don't think any of our stories are ever linear, So
yeah. And we make sense of them from the future. At the time, I didn't see these patterns, but now looking back, I can really see this idea of taking your personality with you. You really have to work to make sure that you mitigate the potential weaknesses you have in the area whilst building on your strengths.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you take your personality with you. And it's so true, as I can relate to the move from a corporate job to being an entrepreneur. And seeing my habits and behaviors show up in this role that I've created for myself, this work that I've created for myself, and always having to build in. I mean, I ask these questions because I constantly need reminders of, how do we make self-care sustainable? What does self-care look like for me? How do I define self-care? And how do I build that into my week, my daily existence? Is that even sustainable in and of itself? These are all things that I want you, as the workplace psychologist expert, to touch on, if you would be so kind. I mean, I know that's a lot of things. So yeah, I'll let you take that topic and run with it.
So I think that if we're gonna be our best self, and that's my kind of vision for me and for the people that I work with, whatever that looks like, and that does not have to be saving the world. Being your best self just is you showing up in the world in the way that is the best way possible for you. So that's the first thing. Setting goals, or setting an idea of yourself that is achievable, rather than pushing yourself to something that isn't you. Remembering that we are a work in progress. So the self-compassion and the self-kindness, and I find this very challenging, is really critical. Like, really trying to remind yourself, I'm not done. Like, there's always another day until there isn't, and then probably we're not worrying about it so much. There's always another day to explore and to work on your self-compassion and to work on your self-kindness. I think one of the biggest things, and this is one of my personal challenges that I work on a lot, is our self-talk, the narrative that we have in our head. And I know this comes up in lots of ways for people. Trying to be your own best friend in your head, talk to yourself like that rather than the way we normally talk to ourselves. That makes a really big difference. And then one of the things I also suggest with people is to get to know yourself more. The more we know ourselves, the better actions we can take. So knowing at a most basic level what nourishes you and what depletes you, I think is really powerful, because then there's some small tweaks that we can make to include a bit more of what nourishes us and a bit less of what depletes us. And of course, there are things we have to do. But I often think we have more choices than we think we do. They're just hard choices. So leaving the UK and leaving my corporate job and becoming a freelancer was not an easy decision. And at the time, I had a house, an apartment, a car, a life, people around me. Like, I was very well embedded in my life. And so leaving that took time and took some hard choices, but they were choices that were possible for me to make. Now, of course, if you have children, different types of connections might require different types of choices. But I think sometimes seeing that there are more choices than we think there are, even if they're difficult, is also useful to remember. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I want to go back to something you said earlier about kind of learning about yourself, taking the time to do self-study. So important, so valuable, and it's so much easier said than done. And so I was listening to a podcast recently. It was an interview with Nedra Glover Tawwab. She's an author who was speaking to this idea of where do we give our energy away, and can we slow down enough to notice when I'm choosing to show up? And, let's say it's a friend that every time you have a conversation with this friend, they're just complaining. And you notice yourself feeling like, oh, I don't want to hang out with that friend because I always feel really tired afterwards. Or, I feel more depleted. This person might be sucking energy out of me instead of giving me energy or even meeting me halfway. So it was just a nice reminder hearing you say that, is to notice these interactions that we choose to show up for in our life. They are choices. We choose to engage with this or that person. We choose to have these friends in our life. And, I think it's tough for us as we think about even like family members who tend to be a little bit more depleting than energizing, because after all, they're family, right? So how do you make those tough decisions? But I do think it's important to recognize that these relationships that we have are choices. And there are times when we can choose to engage, to make that phone call, to set that, friend date or romantic date and spend time with that person or spend time with yourself. So I definitely want to highlight that point that you made. And yeah, I think just like the idea of the pendulum, here's what I was thinking of too, is the idea of the pendulum swinging enough to know when you've hit your boundary, when you've hit your, what is the word for that? Like you've hit your limit, right? Because how do you know, and I'd be curious to see what you think about this. How do you know your limit until you've gone beyond it? Do you think you can know that ahead of time? Or do you have to set that boundary?
Two things to pick up on there. So first, I think the thing that you talk about in terms of friends and family is super important. In my family, we used to call them drains and radiators.
Yes.
So is that person a drain or a radiator? And it's quite a useful, silly name because it reminds you of exactly that. Is that person a drain or a radiator? And I wrote a first book on self-care. And one of the tips I had in the original, or exercises I had in the original draft, was about cutting out a friend who was a drain. And in the end, I couldn't bring myself to put it in the book because I felt it's such it's like a really advanced tip. I suggested, and I suggest to you and to people around you and to the listeners to mute them on social media. That's like a great first step. So remember, you can mute people on social media. You do not have to have their stuff in your feed. You can mute them. They won't know. They'll still be your friends. You can always go and look at them if you want. And if you do have drains in your life, which honestly most of us do, because people are people, balance that with time to nourish yourself. So that's the recognizing piece. Okay, I have this person. They're a family member. I feel some responsibility towards seeing them. There is something I get out of this relationship, but I know I need to have some boundaries around it, and I need to spend some time on my own or spend some time with a radiator afterwards. So that's the kind of balance. If you can cut people out of your life, then power to you. But I suspect most of us, realistically, which is what I'm trying to do in terms of the suggestions that I give, like what is practical and reasonable for most human beings, realistically, most of us are going to keep them in our lives. So it's about management. And then the second piece you talked about is, how do we know whether we've hit our limit? And I think that is a really interesting question. Again, I'm definitely someone that can run quite a long time on an empty tank and then just crash. That's it. I just am ill then. And it's much better, obviously, to not get to that point, in my personal experience. So what I suggest there is also keeping an eye on yourself. So for me, I write morning pages every day. So I write a journal entry every day. It's not very long. I set a timer for 10 minutes, and I just blur out onto the page whatever's happened the day before. And that's a good way of checking in. So I read those morning pages monthly, and I go back and I just have a quick read through. Like, I don't spend hours on it. And that's a good way of checking in with myself. Like, is there anything there that maybe I need to, any themes, anything that come, am I whining about something every single day? Well, okay, maybe I need to take some action on that. Like, it's okay to whine in my morning pages. It's a good place for it. But do I need to take some action because actually there's a problem? So that's one way. I also do a gratitude journal every day, and I use an app, and the app has a mood checker, which is useful. And again, I can look at that and think, is there something, is there like some patterns in there? I mean, I'm super structured, I guess. So I also have a health spreadsheet of like pain, basically. It looks at different pain, what I eat, stuff like that. And that's because I have these health conditions, and it helps me to know, okay, is there a bad patch that I'm going through? And I can look at the numbers in that, and that goes back quite a lot of years now. So I have lots of way of tracking. So if people are able to track either qualitatively, like morning pages, or quantitatively, like do a mood checker, there's something called moodscope.com. Have you ever come across that?
No. Is it Moodscope?
Moodscope, I think. Yeah, I'll send you the link, and you can share it. That's a 20-question psychological like mood tracker, and that is really useful, and it's used for people with challenges around depression, but also it's just useful to track your mood and see, like, if you have a plunge down, again, maybe you can look into it. But it asks you questions, so it helps you to assess your own mood. So yeah, lots of ways for me about keeping an eye on it to give me warning signs. I also have a partner these days, and he will also give me blunt and honest feedback. He's a techie. Blunt and honest feedback that maybe I'm not being as chirpy or as cheerful as might be helpful in the relationship. So the people around you can also give you a check-in. How do you do it at the moment? So you're someone who does so many things, and of course you have your own health practice, physical and mental health practice with yoga. How do you check in and make sure that you don't reach that point?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I've tried so many different things. Morning pages has been one thing I've definitely done, as well as a gratitude journal. I find I am not consistent with those things lately. So when I talk about sustainability, for me, it's not something that happens daily. And I definitely, so what is sustainable for me is thinking about I think about my day with morning and evening being bookends. And if I set myself up with this kind of template for success, usually whatever happens throughout the day, I can manage it, whether it's a really chaotic, stressful day or it's a calm and relaxing day. So my bookends look like, I'll start with evening. I start a wind down routine when the sun is setting. I usually try to be done with work around 5, knowing that, of course, that ebbs and flow. I let myself be flexible if needed. And I like to eat dinner early. I do have animals. I have 4 animals. So They really help me stay honest with that schedule because they let you know when they're hungry. So I have to stop and they're on their schedule. So I have to stop at 5 p.m. my time, feed the animals. This helps me, like you were mentioning, like turn your laptop off. That's like okay, we're done working for the day. Feed the animals. I have my dinner. Then if possible, I am done with work and I'm eating a really good, nourishing meal. I'm super into nutrition and wellness in terms of being mindful of what we put in our bodies, how we nourish our bodies with the food we eat. So not only what am I eating, but how am I eating it? Why am I eating it? When am I eating it? Where am I eating it? I kind of try to stay cognizant of these factors around food and nutrition. I go for a walk because I have dogs. And again, like these animals like really create stability and sustainability in my life. So every evening I take my dogs for a walk. Really good for the digestion too, not to mention like after eating dinner to go for a walk. Also helps set my circadian rhythm and get me prepared for bed, walking underneath that moonlight. And then I always, this is something is non-negotiable for me. So I do have my non-negotiables, read fiction before bed. I heard once, I think this was on a Tim Ferriss podcast, that there's some research to support that reading fiction before bed is soothing for the nervous system. And that kind of like creative energy helps your brain start to shut down and move towards like the dreamland. And I start my day similarly. So ideally I'm like in bed by around 9 p.m., which allows me to wake up naturally around 6 a.m. And I feed my animals. I do have coffee. That's one of my other non-negotiables because I love the ritual of coffee, the smell of it, the taste of it, the way it
Me
looks.
too.
Right? It's so yummy. And I read again. I just give myself like 5 to 10 minutes. Some days it's longer to read my fiction. And those are my, they're simple things. And they're predictable, but I think we overcomplicate our lives thinking that our habits and our behaviors for ritual need to be complicated, and they really don't. And they can be the same thing every day, and we're pretty happy with that. So yeah, those are my rituals. I want to hear more about. Okay, so we started to talk about. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. So we started to talk about this shift from the brick and mortar, the office workplace to working from home. And so many of us are working from home. And so you mentioned, like, I love that idea of having a sign on your door, like, I'm in a meeting, don't disturb me, for the kiddos and stuff in the house. How can we set up our home environment, whether it's like your own personal office, to be that place that is motivating? Like, we want to get up and we want to go to work. We want to, whether it's sit in front of our computer or whatever it is that we do for work, feel like this is a good place to be and something I feel motivated to do.
Okay, so some suggestions that I would have is, first of all, if you can have a consistent place, I think that's very helpful. So for me, I'm lucky enough to have an office which has a permanent desk in it. And so I'm able to set that up for work. Even if you don't have that, even if you have to create your office every day, it's at the dining table, I still think there are some small things that you can do. And part of those are ritualizing it again. And as you say, ritual does not have to be super complicated and involve candles and all kinds of things. A ritual is just a repeated action that's meaningful to you, that maybe is a bit not meaningful to anyone else. It's not a habit. A habit is like structured and something that is clear why we're doing it. But a ritual might be repeating something out loud. It's very much personal to yourself. So some of the things that I would suggest were, first of all, if you can, use your, what do we call it, background screen to light you up. So for me, I have a word of the year every year. You can tell I really do implement as many of the things that I suggest as I can. So I have a word of the year. I've created a background on my screen so that word shows up, but in as beautiful a way as it can be. And that draws my attention to that word. And it happens to be ease this year, which is a bit aspirational, but it really, just seeing that word reminds me to relax my shoulders, for example. It's fascinating, the effect. And so there's some ritual in that. I also suggest having what I would call an object of beauty on your desk. And that can be super small. Let me see if I can show you. I have several. I'll show you one of mine, which is a shell, a conch shell that my partner bought me, and I find it super beautiful. It's beautiful to touch, it's beautiful to look at. It's on my desk. It reminds me of him. I have a picture of him and his child as well, but the shell is this object of beauty, and that's something I can take around with me. So I often do go to cafes. What I tend to take to cafes, funny enough, is colored pens. So I love colored pens. I love color, and so if I go to a cafe, I obviously have my background, but I take those colored pens with me and they bring me some small joy and some Post-its. So again, these joys, these pleasures really don't have to be huge, but think about what does bring you joy. So for me, silly as it is, if I take notes in a mind map with colored pen, that gives me some happiness, even if I'm doing something complex and work related.
I love that. I might steal that colored pen tip. You said mind map. Can you tell me more about that?
Okay. So a mind map is a way of exploring information, mapping information that I'm sure you've seen them, where you have something in the middle and then you have branches coming off to the sides.
Yes.
And I love mind maps. And in fact, my partner and I run our lives through mind maps. Like whenever we're doing anything, we do a mind map. And so I have them on the computer online as well. That's a way of like my note taking. If I'm exploring an idea for an article, so if I'm working the book, the original genesis of the book, I use the mind map to map it out. But when I am thinking about things, just like noodling, as you say, like just trying to be creative, then I use colored pens and mind maps physically, because I also find that quite powerful. What else do it? So I adore Post-its. I try to help myself focus by using the kanban method, which is essentially choosing 3 Post-its at a time, not letting myself get distracted by other things, only focusing on them and replacing one of those Post-its with a new Post-it when I've managed to finish one of those tasks. And that helps me focus. And you can take Post-its anywhere. So that's also useful for working in a cafe just as much at home.
Can I interject with a
Yeah, sorry, I have like a million suggestions, so
and they're all
I should
good.
stop to breathe.
No, I love it. Keep them coming. But I want to understand the way that you're utilizing the Kanban method at a cafe, because I want to steal that. And because I've used the Kanban method in software programs, I'm familiar with it in something like Jira. But I haven't actually done it tactically with my hands in a cafe, which I love working from cafes. So you said 3 Post-it notes and you're working with one idea at a time, or maybe 3 ideas at a time. Are you writing like a word or a sentence or a phrase on these?
What I try to do, and I'm going to be kind to myself and say not perfect, is have what the specific action is. So trying to split out doing and deciding time is really crucial. I think often when we get blocked, it's because we're trying to do some deciding, but we're in doing time. So I try, not perfect, to have done my deciding before I do my doing. So when I have my 3 Post-its, I'm like visualizing them now, I write on what my next 3 actions are of 3 different projects. And for me, it helps me to choose 3 things. One that's like big. So right now I'm writing an article, and that needs quite a lot of my mental capacity. So that's my big task. And then usually I have an admin-y thing, which has to get done, but I'm not very excited about it. And then I have a growth thing, like a course or something like that, something small. And then I do 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and I rotate between them. Now, sometimes I can't do that because the big task is urgent and has to be done, and I might change it. But if I have the flexibility, so actually later today I'm going to do some fiction writing, and my fiction writing will be the big task, and noodling will be my on like what the plot of the next book's going to be will be another task. Like that's how I use my Kanban, and I physically write them down. I have them, and there's so much joy in screwing up the Post-it and throwing it in the bin when the task is done. Like that is for me a completion activity.
Yeah, that's like how I feel when I cross something off of my list.
Yeah, absolutely.
So cathartic. I love that. I want to hear more about your fiction writing process. I'm an aspiring novelist myself. I haven't actually written one down, but I feel like, I don't know if maybe you'll empathize with this. I feel like I've been writing one in my head since I was 5 or several, maybe multiple books. And so mind mapping is something that I just learned about as it applies to the fiction writing process, and had never thought about utilizing it for anything else in my life until you just mentioned that. I call it brainstorming when I'm doing that kind of like not a Venn diagram, but that kind of a mind mapping diagram. So can I hear more about how to say, your, like, what sparks that okay. Wow. I'm all over the place.
No, I like it. I like the excitement. It's nice.
There's like a question in here, and it's very important that I'm really trying hard to spit out. And I think it's around, like, as Elizabeth Gilbert would call it, that elusive creative genius that is kind of like sitting over there in the corner telling you you should write the next great American novel. But when you go sit down to write, you're like, I don't know, where did that idea go? So how do you approach that creatively when writing something like fiction?
Okay. Some big questions there. So one of the things is that I told myself at the start that I'm not writing the great American novel, because I'm really not. Well, first of all, I'm British, so that's a thing.
Yes.
But also, the genre that I write in is paranormal romance. So it's magic and love. Like, that's the thing. And you might be interested, where I came up with the idea for the series that I'm working on at the moment is when I was living on an island in Thailand and at a tantric yoga school, which I attended for a year. Was a very interesting experience, many learnings. I don't do tantric yoga or it's not something that I feel aligned to anymore. It was experience at the time, but what it inspired me to use the chakras as a magic system. So I was doing a lot of deep learning about the chakras and about obviously about all aspects of yoga, and I love many aspects of yoga, although right now I'm doing acro yoga, so very unclear whether I would actually count that as yoga, but it's super fun. But the tantric yoga sparked these ideas in me that I was then able to take. And what I feel strongly about fiction and nonfiction is you have to have the ideas, but you also have to have the persistence and discipline to actually write the book, which is not easy. Like the current fiction that I've been writing, which is the 4th in the series, has taken me a long time. And part of that is because the work wellness book bubbled up in between. Part of it is because I still work a lot as a consultant, and so I'm balancing that. Part of that is I met my partner 6 years ago, and he has a child who's now 10, and that was a very different world. I was never intending to have children. I am so lucky. I adore this particular child. He's lovely, but obviously that really changed my life in a way I wasn't expecting. So there's juggling all these things. But going back to your question, the idea, I tend to have a lot of ideas. The challenge for me is capturing it and shaping it and holding on to it in a way that I can then communicate that to others. And I've done a lot of reading and courses and developing my writing, my business writing, my nonfiction writing. I find not super easy, but like it comes to me more naturally. I've been a consultant for 20 years. I am used to communicating complex psychology ideas to non-psychologists. So I feel comfortable with that. But fiction was a really new area for me. And it's a lot harder. It brings a different kind of joy. Like I love it.
Yeah.
And I love the completed product, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And often we don't want to do things that are hard.
Yeah.
So you have to really, that's why I use this 20-minute, 10-minute, 5-minute, because it's a way of saying to myself, it's okay, you just have to stick with this task for 20 minutes and then we're going to do something different and come back to it.
I love that. Do you how do you approach that? Do you do it daily? Like, do you say Monday through Friday, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to work on my novel, on my creative fiction writing process?
No, and that's mainly because I'm a freelancer and I choose the work that I take as a consultant, and it varies. So this week, for example, I'm doing some meetings, but I'm not doing any face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom these days interaction with the end client. But next week, I'm doing 2 days of work plus some report writing, and I'm working with the UK, so it's 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. Which is going to be a killer. So I have to be both structured and flexible. So it's interesting. I was thinking about what you were saying about your routine, and what you've given yourself is some like grounding posts in the ground. Like every day you do certain things, and maybe they're not a big deal, but they give you that consistency, that reliability, touchstones, I guess, in a way. And I have a morning routine, which gives me that kind of touchstone. But then where the stretch is for me is having the flexibility, because by nature, I'm a more routine-orientated person. That's my personality. And when I started working with the Middle East and Southeast Asia, where time is a slightly different concept, particularly when I was doing face-to-face, people are a lot more chill about turning up on time or turning up at all. And they want you to change things on the fly. Oh, can you just do a slightly different course than you've planned? Those are really hard experiences for me, and have really helped me to stretch that personality and give me more choices in the way that I react. But that means that with my fiction, I have to balance flexibility with routine. So what I try and do is a session a week, so like a morning or an afternoon, and I'm trying to do 2 sessions at the moment. but fitting it in around other things. Like there's also nonfiction that I'm writing right now for the Work Wellness Toolkit. I'm doing these kind of activities, which are also really enjoyable. So fitting in all the things is a challenge. But yeah, I try and have what I would call a session, like let's say 3 hours. And then in that, I do my 20-10-5, 20-10-5, 20-10-5 a good few times. And that gives me progress on my writing. But the book suffered last year when I was working a lot more because I had to drop something. And that's part of self-care, I think. That's part of self-care at work, saying to yourself, okay, I want to do all the things, but actually I need to make some hard choices about what I have the energy for right now. And unfortunately, even though the fiction is one of the things that brings me joy, I need to just pause it for a second. Like she's not going anywhere. The book will still be there and I'll come back to it.
Yeah. Gosh, you said so many things I want to touch on, and I feel like I have time for one more question, and I'm like, oh, what's the last one? So I guess what that means to me as I'm saying that out loud is maybe if you'd be open to it, we'd just do a round 2 so I can just keep asking questions.
Sure, I really enjoyed talking to you, for sure.
Thank you, Ellen. I feel so... I empathize with so many things that you're saying, and I feel so inspired too, in particular around writing fiction and applying this method, the kanban method, to fiction writing. I love that. Is there, as you think back on childhood and to the person that you are today through all of these experiences in your life, from the voice of your childhood self, is there any advice that childhood self, if you could place yourself in your childhood mind, that she would give to you now?
Wow, that's a deep question to end on.
Take your time.
So what comes to me is it's okay to be who you are. So when I was a child, I read a lot, and I still read a lot. I'm a 100 books a year person. Like I love reading fiction, nonfiction. It's something that really nourishes me. Like it's part of my self-care. And I am an introvert by nature. When I moved into consulting, I develop myself to be able to extrovert. Like when you meet a new client every day, you need to be able to have the tools to interact with new people. And so I expanded my toolbox. But I think my childhood self would remind me that being who I am at the core is just fine. And I heard a metaphor the other day on a podcast about personal development and growth, that if you think about a tree, the tree's there, but sometimes we cut off branches in order to let new things grow. We might nurture the tree, we might change the tree, but the tree is still there. And I love that metaphor. It really resonated with me as a metaphor for personal development and growth, because I think there's a real tension between this idea of, well, I need to love myself as who I am, but I also need to grow, be a better person. And I think if we think about ourselves as this tree, that allows us to be who we are. So for me, that introverted self who's reading a book and is really happy, nourishing themselves, spending a bit of time on their own reading a book, and still grow, and still strive's not the right word, and still invest time in ourselves to be the best version of that tree, to be the best version of that self, and to show up with as much sparkle as we can, and connect with the right people, connect with the radiators who resonate with who you're your true self or your natural personality is. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, okay, so I have like a million more follow-up questions. My first question is, how old is she, this childhood self that's giving you this advice?
Maybe 8, I would say. She's little, and part of that, I didn't have big traumas in my childhood. I had a nice childhood. It was solid. My parents loved me. They were together. Well, my dad died, so they were together until he died. Like they didn't get divorced. I remember my childhood positively, and I don't have a lot of, how people mind their childhoods and say, oh, I can see that this was an event where this happened. I don't have a lot of those, and as a psychologist, that can be a bit embarrassing. Like I feel reasonably content with my past. I can see things that have happened, but I don't have these big moments that some people have. And so I think there's a quietness for me, and probably it comes from photos. There's a lot of photos of me reading books from as a child. I think it comes partly from those, and remembering that comfort of reading my book in my bedroom, in the garden. We lived in the countryside, so there's lots of fields around us. And that being very nourishing for me. And nature today is still very nourishing for me. I recently bought a teeny tiny plant. I'll show you my teeny tiny plant.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's so happy looking.
Yeah. And we have plants outside. Like we live in a condo, so it's different life from living in a house, which I lived in mostly in the UK. But remembering from my childhood that nature and reading are things that nourish me is a good reminder.
Yeah, she's wise. I love that. That was a heavy one to end on. I think to lighten it up, I would, and this is a short answer, unless you want to expound upon it, which you're more than welcome to. So I always love, because I'm a voracious reader myself, and I feel like we would have been really good friends as kids, because we probably could have just sat there side by side reading our books in our field.
Awesome.
Our cats frolicking around. I mean, I always had cats, so I don't.
We always had cats too.
Okay.
Yeah, we needed them.
I felt like there's a kindred spirit in there. So I'm wondering. This is my question: what is one book, fiction and nonfiction, that you've read, recently, maybe within the last year or last month, that you would highly recommend that others read themselves?
Okay, nonfiction, I would recommend, let me see if I can remember what it's called. It's by Lisa Barrett Feldman. You may have come across it. I'm sure I've got it written down somewhere. The title, How Emotions Are Made. How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. And as a psychologist, it completely changed my understanding of emotions, which is a big deal. Like, you learn a lot about emotions as a psychologist. And it's a topic I'm very interested in. I'm reading the Brené Brown Atlas of the Heart at the moment, which is also very interesting. But that Lisa Feldman Barrett really changed the way that I thought about emotions, and really helped me in processing emotion, in practical ways to think about emotion and how to use it, and how emotion interacts with our mind, and how it's actually just part of us, not something separate. So that would be my non-fiction. In terms of fiction, gosh, that's a bigger one. The 2 books that I really loved last year were, I think they're about Gideon and Harrow. I'm going to have to look up the titles. I'm not very good at remembering the Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth, and they are by Tamsin Muir, so TAMSYN MUIR, and they are very unexpected as books, and the voice in both of them is so strong and compelling, and they're described as lesbian necromancers in space. Now, what I would say is that's a good hook, but it doesn't really encapsulate how compelling they are. But if you like exploring different types of person, but if you have an interest in a bit of fantasy, I think they're really powerful books. They really captured me. I've both read them and listened to them on audiobook, and I've listened to the audiobooks more than once, which, given how many books I read, is quite interesting, because I don't often do repeats because I want to read new things. But they're a bit different, compelling, unique, and really engaging. So clearly you can see by my excitement that I really like them, but they're just very unexpected, is how I would say. And I like reading queer fiction when I can. Like, I think there's not enough representation, and I like it when that's not the point of the plot. Like that is just she happens to like girls. That's no big deal, and I like that a lot. So, I would really recommend them.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to check them out, because I get a little bit, you might be able to relate to this. if I have maybe 1 or 2 books left to read on my shelf and I'm 3/4 of the way through that current book, I get anxious if I don't have at least 3 to 4 in my stack ready to go.
Oh,
so I
so
always
many.
need that list,
So many. It's funny. I think it's interesting. Time-wise, I need to not go on too much here, but I think it's interesting how our tastes change as well. So I started a crime novel. I like lots of different novels, and I started a crime novel the other day, and I realized a few chapters in that the pervasive sense of anxiety it was creating in me wasn't worth it. And I find it so hard to let go of books. Like, I'm such a completionist. If I've started a book, then I feel a really strong need to finish it. And I felt like it was a real act of compassion for myself that I let it go, because it just was not creating good feelings in me. I didn't want to be anxious for the whole of this book.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's such an important lesson to learn, that you could apply to your life. And I love this as a way to wrap up our conversation, because I feel like if that's a takeaway, to be able to put something down that you've started that you realize is not serving you is such a gift.
Yeah.
So I love that we wrapped that up in that way, Ellen. And I so appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, likewise. Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.